Chapter 619, Raid Part 1. Thanks to all the merits he had racked during the past year, Lith had been granted access to the Royal Library. It was the biggest and most complete library in the Griffin Kingdom, covering all the subjects known to mages, including the forbidden ones. The library was comprised of many floors, one for each element. Normal books could be checked out freely, whereas to consult forbidden books it was necessary to spend merits and receive a recommendation letter from someone with a high clearance level. In Lith's case, both Professor Marth and Vaster had vouched for him along with his commanding officer. Lith was now sitting behind at a hardwood table, surrounded by fellow mages in search of knowledge. The city of Valeron, the capital of the Griffin Kingdom, was surrounded by all kinds of protective arrays, and because of them, Lith couldn't put the valuable tomes inside Solispedia to read them all in a single moment. Dimensional magic would allow spies and thieves to freely warp, so it had been sealed. Lith and Solis had spent the last few hours reading tomes about necromancy, to see if among the undead species there was one suitable for Lith's tastes. Unfortunately, despite having even checked the legendary creatures section, their quest had ended up in failure. Sigh, why real vampires suck so bad. They have so many limitations that now I can understand why despite becoming a vampire is relatively safe and easy no mage wants to be turned into one. Lith thought. Please, if there was such a thing as an immortal and eternally young species that had no weakness at all, outside becoming a disco ball under the sunlight, they would have ruled Mogar for millennia. Solis said, yet despite her mockery, she was dejected as well. As long as Lith was human and with a cracked life force at that, he was bound to die sooner or later. Solis had no intention of letting that happen, but just like Lith, she was now clutching at straws. According to the tomes of the Royal Library, there was a way for Lith to safely become an undead and retain all of his memories. Unlike necromancy, that worked on corpses that no longer had a working brain in Monocore, many species of undead could slowly turn a living being into one of their own. In such a case, the subject would never really die. A blood core would take form inside their bodies and grow over time, replacing their Monocore the moment their heart ceased to beat. The problem was that there was no undead species without absurd or crippling limitations. Most of them were unable to even move during the day, trapped in a forced slumber no matter the danger they were in or how deep below the earth they hid. Others, like the banshees, couldn't cross water and would die if they fell into a river or a lake. Yet their biggest weakness was their inability to use light magic. For someone like Lith, who had spent countless hours to become a healer, it was an unacceptable trade. To make matters worse, light magic wasn't just needed to heal others. Without it, Lith would also be unable to forge master truly powerful artifacts and even to use dimensional magic as freely as he had always done. Blink, one of his bread and butter spells during fights, required light magic, and so did Switch. Undead weren't completely unable to use light magic, but since their blood core was unable to assimilate it from its surroundings, they had to consume their own life force in order to produce light energy. It meant that if Lith decided to turn into an undead, just to forge master a single item he would need to consume the equivalent of a pigpen of food. Some undead were picky about who they could feed upon, and of course, their victim had to be alive. Lith couldn't store living humans inside his pocket dimension, and he couldn't bear the thought of traveling with a caravan of slaves. He would have to feed and care for them every day just to murder them later. I can be morally flexible, sure, but where the heck do I keep so many people at all times without being found out and hunted down? Liches have no such problems, but after reading a lot about them, I don't think it's something I'd like to become. First, there is no surefire way to become one. I would need to spend years to find a way suitable for my unique monocore and life force, just for a measly 10% success rate, with no do-overs. My luck always sucked, so I don't feel like playing with dice. Also, the phylactery is a huge weak point. It cannot be stored in a dimensional item and it can't be too far. On top of that, after meeting Zolgrish, I discovered another weak point liches have. If I conceal space with an array and I cut them off from the link with their phylactery, both their physical and magical strength will be halved, plus they would become unable to recover their mana. Lith thought, not knowing he had just discovered the principle underlying Ligane's anti-lich spell. Unless they bring it with them, Solis pointed out. That's too risky. Life vision, your mana sense, Scarlet's pants nez. There are countless ways to spot such a powerful object, and even if the lich might somehow cloak it, the constant stream of mana and life force would betray its position. Lith was right, yet most ancient liches would rather bring their phylactery around with them while fighting a truly dangerous opponent than being one-shotted. I can definitely discard becoming an undead as an option, unless I'm either desperate if I discover a new species with acceptable limits. Creating a new race all by myself might as well take all the lifespan I've left and I would have no certainty of success. He thought. I don't like the idea of turning into an abomination either. They may be immortal, but so far all the ones I met seem to be mad, miserable, or both. My best shot is to research ways to improve my life force to prolong my existence while I search for the blueprints of a soul-binding artifact. After copying everything he might need to improve his true necromancy, Lith left the Royal Library. Both of his communication amulets were silent, but in his experience, no news were good news. If the army kept not bothering him, Lith could keep exploring the lost cities of the Keller region for clues, whereas not hearing from both his family and Camilla meant that Falmug had yet to try anything funny. Lith would have loved to stop torturing him and take him out of the picture once and for all, but he had to play it smart so that no one would suspect him. Thanks to the tower warp, he had never left his prey alone for long. Lith let those morbid thoughts slide and used the capital's gate to return to the north. Despite all of its flaws, the army was still the perfect cover to spend a long time away, performing his research night and day. Among his most recent pet projects, there was crafting with the eyes of the Balor a magical staff that could mimic General Vor's, improving the power of the lesser undead he was able to create at will and raid the lost city of Hariel. Unlike the other ruins he had visited, Hariel was almost perfectly preserved. Gold, jewels, magic books, there were countless things up for the taking. Unluckily, the creatures inhabiting the city made every raid extremely difficult. Web Novel, Chapter 620, Raid Part 2. Lith's predecessors hadn't left all that goodies out of the goodness of their hearts. Finding something valuable inside Hariel required luck, plus one had to fight not only against powerful monsters, but also against time. The lost city was a living labyrinth that would periodically rearrange itself, making any old map useless. To make matters worse, its walls couldn't be affected by earth magic, dimensional magic was sealed, and destroying the walls to make haste only made the cursed item that ruled Hariel angry. Normally, the problem with the inhabitants of a lost city was that they would grow in power and numbers over time. It was a ranger's duty to cull them and reset their power before they became too strong. In Hariel's case, however, the number of creatures that spawned and their power was fixed. Even the monsters had a hard time finding their way out of the city, and Lith only had to kill those who managed to reach the external barrier before they could breach it. From the outside, the lost city looked like a giant stone dome. The only entrances were located at the ground level, and breaking the dome would make the cursed object who protected the city turn the whole Hariel into a rampaging golem. Flight was useless as well, making many wonder what lay at the center of the city and for what purpose it had been built. Lith couldn't stop thinking how odd it was that rangers were allowed to take for themselves whatever they recovered from it. Hariel was also nicknamed the Cursed Training Ground. Lith used his badge to bypass the magical barrier isolating the city and checked the reset counter. The labyrinth would randomize itself at fixed intervals, so he had to make sure that it wouldn't happen any soon. Otherwise, if a combat lasted for too long or if he managed to get deep into Hariel, Lith would risk becoming trapped inside the city. According to the counter, the next reset was in half a day, so Lith went directly inside. I swear, this place is oddly familiar. The rooms are always different, but the vibe here is something I already experienced somewhere else. Lith thought while crossing a small courtyard, where several training dummies and weapons were orderly lined up. A quick check with life vision confirmed to him that there was nothing valuable. The only magical aura in the room belonged to the walls encasing the courtyard. Solis used her spirit magic to pick up the weapons and use them to strike down the dummies. Why did you do that? Lith asked as the last straw man was cut into half. Cursed training ground, training dummies, I thought maybe there was a reward for clearing the task. She replied. Yeah, if this was a video game, you might be right. Real life is a bit different, though. No one rewards you for completing menial tasks. Lith's voice oozed with sarcasm. The following room looked like a warehouse of some kind. Wooden cupboards and shelves were lined against the wall, while multiple vases filled with food lay around, enchanted with an unknown spell that prevented it from rotting. Jackpot, Lith thought. I've never seen this kind of pseudo-core before. I wonder if I'm the first to. A quick use of invigoration made him lose interest. Damn, the pseudo-core, it's too complex compared to a dimensional item. This thing is worthless to me. Lith still copied it down to the smallest detail, just to be safe. Fake mages couldn't scan magical items as he had just done, and even if such a spell was of no use to Lith, the kingdom might have been interested in buying it from him. The shelves in the room had several books, but after a quick glance, they turned out to be either inventory or account books. Lith opened the door leading to the next room, surprised that he had yet to find a crossroad or a monster. Up to that point, his path had only one way in and one way out, making a map pointless. The outer layers have always been easy, but never this simple. If it keeps like this, I could get really deep into Hariel. Why is my paranoia sense tingling, though? Lith thought. Well, maybe because if it's easy to get in, then it's also easy to get out. It's not like this place is inhabit. Thanks, Solis. Way to jinx it, Lith said as he stepped inside what looked like a dorm, running into a mage slayer and a white lady. They were two kinds of undead who were able to stay awake during the day, as long as they avoided direct sunlight. Unfortunately for Lith, all the light inside Hariel was artificial, so that his enemies could move without problems. A mage slayer was usually born from the dying body of a powerful swordsman. In their new form, they would be unable to use fake magic, but their undead nature combined with their skills allowed them to channel the elemental energy into their swordplay. They weren't true mages, but they were able to cast spells without any chant or hand signs. They just needed to perform a series of attacks to unleash all kinds of elemental attacks up to tier 3. On top of that, magic was their source of nourishment, making all kinds of direct spells useless against them, no matter their tier. Both fake and true mages had a hard time facing someone with infinite stamina that could use magic by simply swinging their blades in close combat. The mage slayer in front of Lith looked like a featureless humanoid mass of orange gas wielding a long sword covered in runes of power. Its red eyes were fixated on him, seething with hunger. Inside the borders of Hariel, all the creatures the labyrinth spawned couldn't die, but that didn't mean that they would be freed from their needs. Why is its sword covered in runes? Aren't they supposed to disappear after the forge mastering process ends? Solis thought, glad to have the opportunity to share part of her memories without giving out her secret. Why is your sword covered in runes? Lith asked with a sarcastic voice, talking to Solus more than to the mage slayer. The creature rushed at Lith, its blade slashing the air in front of itself to unleash a fireball. Sorry, Solus, it says it doesn't feel ready to share on a first date. Lith thought while clapping his hands. It conjured a spinning air dome that sucked the fireball and deflected it against the White Lady. Born from the corpse of a woman who had killed her own children, White Ladies were capable of using only two elements, water and darkness. They needed to feed on the life force of children and they extracted it by drowning them. The undead was wearing a tattered wedding gown. The pristine white of the dress emphasized her gray necrotic flesh. Due to the prolonged lack of food, the White Lady was unable to retain her humanoid physical appearance and was reduced to a zombie-like creature. Yet her hunger didn't diminish her magical powers one bit. She hurled a powerful stream of water that enveloped the fireball and snuffed it out like it was a candle. The White Lady shrieked in anger while looking at her companion with so much anger that Lith hoped she would attack the mage slayer.